for about 20 or 25 minutes. I love questions while we speak. Diego, if you don't mind monitoring, if someone raises their hand or puts something in the chat, I really appreciate it. I am going to ask you questions about who's done stuff, and it makes it a much more interesting and interactive experience if you share even a sentence or two. I know it can be uncomfortable on Zoom to when you're around people you don't know, but this will be so much better if I'm not the only one talking for the next 20 or 25 minutes. I've got about 25 slides, and I'll start sharing my screen now. All right, I assume everyone can see that? Good, perfect. So my name is Mike. I currently work for the Department of Health Services in Los Angeles under the Emergency Medical Services Agency. I spent about 15 years in the field as a paramedic. I deployed to Nepal for the earthquake. I deployed to Haiti for the big earthquake as part of medical teams. I deployed to the Philippines after the super typhoon Haiyan struck there as part of a medical team. I'm on a federal disaster medical team, so I went to Houston for the Hurricane Harvey and responded there. All that to say, I do have some experience, and I look forward to sharing it with you, but I also want to hear from your experiences, and they're all valid, whether you did a trip, a mission trip with your church, or something with the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. In some ways, these are all applicable to disaster medical volunteering. And kind of thinking about this talk, although I'd already sent my PowerPoint to Diego, this is an overview of disaster volunteering. I think it's more not just medical, but almost everything I'm talking about is applicable to disaster volunteering. So we're going to kind of go through these things, and these are things questions I want you to keep in your mind. What's your situation now? What if you wanted to volunteer internationally? What if you wanted to work internationally? It sounds like Emma has spent almost the last decade working in the Congo, which is amazing. I'm jealous. I have always wanted to live overseas in a developing country, and just due to my life circumstances and career, I've never been able to. So she's going to, I'll give a few tips from a not very knowledgeable point of view, but she might be able to really dive in as an expert because she's done it, worked for some very prestigious international organizations. But I want you to keep those questions in your mind as we go through. So this is the point where people give their conflicts if they're being sponsored by some big pharmaceutical company, which unfortunately I'm not. I wish I was getting a big paycheck, but I did write a book on international disaster volunteering. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, and I get like $2 a book. So it's not like if everyone in the class bought a book, I'd be able to buy myself, a low priced meal. But because 10 or 12 years ago, when the earthquake struck in Haiti, I was a paramedic working in Florida, and I thought, wow, I'm a great fit for this. I've got emergency medical experience. I've done some search and rescue with the fire department, and I'm going to go sign up with Doctors Without Borders. And they're going to be so excited that this somewhat inexperienced paramedic is coming to them. And they were not. They were not interested in me at all. And I had to go through a process. And I contacted a number of organizations, and they said, do you have experience in international disaster volunteering? And I said, no. And they said, well, you need experience before you can become an international disaster volunteer. And it seemed to be a vicious cycle. So I'll throw out that you might face these circumstances as you go through your professional careers in emergency management, that it's a vicious cycle. You need experience before you can get hired, but you can't get hired and you can't get experience until you're hired. So I kind of found a back door into that, and I'll share that. But the book was an effort to, and luckily I spoke on this topic at an International Association of Emergency Managers conference probably 6 or 7 years ago. And a woman said, oh, that's a cool, is there a book about this? And I said, no. And she said, please, would you write one? And I said, well, I become rich and famous. And she laughed. And that was true, about my $2 a book that I get. But so anyway, it's a system about trying to get international disaster volunteering. I will give you most of the tips that I can while we're speaking. I speak occasionally at the University of Southern California to their School of Public Health. And so I'm going to go through these first 10 or 11 slides pretty quickly so that you kind of know the landscape. But I do think it's important to know who you're working with and who you might work with in the future or volunteer with. So Los Angeles County has public health. We have health services, who I work for. We run 4 large hospitals. We have about 20 clinics. We have all sorts of stuff. There's a separate Pasadena public health. There's Berkeley. That's just the way California is broken up. So I don't know how Missouri is. I came here from Florida, and that's why I have Florida in parentheses there. Florida had one health department for the entire state of Florida, and they had county offices. The California Department of Public Health is the second to last acronym there, and then the Center for Disease Control and the U.S. Health and Human Services. Like any field, disaster response and public health response, they've got this vocabulary. So I would urge you, as Diego says, or Professor Odegji says, like, get familiar with your environment. You're going to have to sound like a professional. You need to know who you're working with and what all these acronyms mean. This is the way California is broken down. We have these regions that are supposed to work with each other in a disaster. If you want to work in your home state, if most of you are from Missouri, know how Missouri works. Is it mostly fire-based EMS, emergency medical services? Is it mostly private ambulance companies? Is it whatever? But I would urge you to try to inject that realism into this scenario that you're facing in your class, however you're supposed to for your class, but try to gain that knowledge. I've taken many classes in emergency management. We always have a fake Disasterville USA with different elements, and that's good. You've got to have those elements as you go through class, but try to learn about your state, how it does work in a disaster, and that may prepare you for an employment, for a volunteer opportunity that may lead to employment in the future. Are any of you currently working in emergency response or emergency management? Any volunteer firefighters or EMTs? Anybody raise their hand or put it in the chat? I see some hands. Just go ahead. I see a couple people. You don't have your names popped up, so I can't see, but go ahead. Whoever wants to speak first, and it's okay if you interrupt each other.
No volunteer work for me, but I currently work as an EMT for an ambulance district.
Nice. And the gentleman above you had his hand up. Above you, he's got headphones on.
I volunteer at the local fire department around Warrensburg.
Excellent, awesome. And you were the only people whose hand I saw. If I'm missing anybody, Diego, in the overall view? No, okay. Again, we're talking about knowing where you are. I love those maps in the mall that says, where's the Aunt Annie's pretzel place and where's the Nike store. Here's how the Federal Emergency Management Agency breaks up our country. And if you're in national disaster response, you hear people talking about Region 8 and Region 9, which is California, or Region 4, where the Center for Disease Control is, and the different responses. And again, it's the same way, it's a similar philosophy as California, to try to get your assistance in a disaster from the states closest to you to build those bonds up. Who can tell me which region Missouri's in? Go ahead.
7.
Nice. Good. So any questions before again, these first 10 slides were kind of like laying the landscape, and I'm going to get into my personal experiences, and I'm going to kind of ask you guys about your personal experiences as well. Last thing, and this just reinforces my point about knowing the language. I think that maybe Emma and Diego would agree with me that the two things you need to do for international disaster relief is you need to know a lot of acronyms, and you see this defense support, DISCA. Oh, that's when the National Guard comes in, or the Army or the Navy comes in to help after a disaster. The NIM is National Incident Management System. Those of you who are EMTs have probably had to take ICS 100 or 200 for your companies or for your fire department, and all these. The two things you need to know these acronyms, or many acronyms, and you need a khaki vest. If you don't have a khaki vest to wear, Emma's laughing because she knows it's true, then you're not a real disaster responder. So I just give you that as your credibility will immensely improve. If you're probably all aware of this stuff, but these are the 15 emergency support functions. They change slightly as different administrations change, but figure out where you are, what you want to do. I came from a medical background at first as a paramedic, and then I got into firefighting. So I kind of have tended to stay within public health and medical services, a little bit in firefighting, although I just found out, I think Emma's husband works in wildland firefighting, which is so cool. But look for the interconnections here. Mass care, assistance and shelter is going to probably need a little medical clinic at that large shelter because these are vulnerable populations. They have medical problems, they have issues. Everybody's going to need logistics. Hazardous materials, does it fall under public health? Because we know about poisons and chemicals. Does it fall under firefighting as it does in many cities? All I'm saying is there's a lot of interconnections. Nothing is as black and white as it'd be simpler if it were, it'd be easier, but it's a complicated world and we're just going to have to get used to it. So I'm going to get into some of my personal kind of experiences and things that I've felt and seen as I went along. I have this planning P because as a bit of technical knowledge, some of you may have seen it as you went through your incident command courses, your IC courses, but I think it's just a neat cycle that talks about reevaluating our actions constantly. And in this case, it's very official, that reevaluating our actions during a response. But then I have this word volunteerism. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but there's been a concern over the past, I think 10 or 15 years about people who go to another country, usually not during a disaster, but say, in order to before they go to college, they go to another country, they volunteer for a week or two at an orphanage. They take a lot of pictures. They come home, they write an essay about their experience. And was that experience to benefit themselves, or was it to benefit the place they went? Did those kids in those orphanage who got attention for a week or two from somebody from another more wealthy country, and then that person left, causing probably maybe some trauma after a bond had been built and a relationship had been constructed, what was the net gain for that country? And there are certainly situations where orphanages and other places are set up to benefit from foreign donations and foreign visitors in a way that could be considered exploitive. So as you go through your scenario, and more importantly, as you go through your experiences, I do want you to kind of jump back to this kind of ethical question of, why am I here? Am I doing more good? Is this really to benefit me? Am I coming to a disaster site to benefit me? Now, I'd say it's less applicable to disaster volunteering because, you didn't start the earthquake or you didn't cause the tornado. But I do want you to keep that in the back of your head. And then I also want to say that I've made my own mistakes. There is a picture coming up later of me around my arm, with my arm around an orphan of the Haiti earthquake. And I definitely posted that on social media because I wanted credit for what I'm doing. I wanted admiration from my friends and, wow, what a great guy. He's over in Haiti helping this poor injured kid. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just not as black and white as we'd like to think. So keep those questions in your head and know that I wouldn't even say that's a mistake. It's just a question that I had to have that I would urge you to ask yourselves as you go through. We talked about those 15 emergency support functions in the United States. That's how the United States National Incident Management System breaks stuff up. But the United Nations for international response breaks it up differently. For health, you've got the World Health Organizations. I think Emma's been involved with, I'm sorry, Emma, did you say World Food Program, or who were you involved with?
No, I was with World Vision International.
And what is their focus?
All of those things, actually.
Okay.
But I have sat in cluster meetings for a lot of those divisions, sectors.
Excellent, excellent. So as Emma was alluding to, Her organization focused on all of these. You can see food, medicine, communications, education, housing. But again, you've got to kind of know the language and know who you would connect with you're in another group. And I would say that I went out with a small church group when I went to Haiti, and they didn't really even know about the UN cluster system. They were really focused on medical aid. And not that I was some expert, but I probably taken an extra emergency management course. And I said, well, we should go to the cluster meetings and we should turn in our information and get information. And it turned out that there were clinics that had supplies that we needed, and we could supply something else to somebody else. So it's not a perfect system, but the more you can integrate with it, I think it does benefit the response. And while you may not be the leader of your group, you may be able to give them some information and say, hey, has anybody clicked in with the cluster system? No. Well, would you, if you mind, if we stop by the headquarters and see when their next meeting for health is, or logistics or shelter, because that's what we're focusing on. So you may have that little bit of information. So I throw this picture up. I do want to ask the group, who has gone overseas or even within the United States for any kind of volunteer mission, Appalachia, Texas, Mexico? Has anyone done any of that kind of stuff? And that's fine. The last group I spoke to, 1 or 2 people had gone to Mexico with like a church group to do, I think, vision clinics or dental clinics. And I just wanted to get your perspective, and it's okay that nobody has. I spent 10 years or 10 full-time years with the fire department. So this picture to me of guys who've got radios and vests and knee pads and dogs, I mean, I'm totally impressed. This is, yes, I want to have a helmet and a headlamp on there. But it kind of brings me to that, that kind of ethical question of why am I doing this? And it's okay if it benefits you and brings fulfillment to your life, but always weighing those pros and cons. So this picture was taken by a friend of mine in Nepal after the earthquake. We responded with a small medical team, and I'll share a few lessons from that. And I know I've got about 10 or 12 minutes left. So we're getting into the kind of personal experiences part. But this medical team that I went over with had not sent an advanced team. And I will say that I went over on a previous trip to the Philippines with an advanced team, and an advanced team figures out where the clinic is going to be. And they get the logistics lined up of food and water and lodging. And for whatever reason, the group I was volunteering with said, let's send the whole team of 12 people there at once. And so for the first day or two, I would say probably 2 or 3 days, we in essence sat around. And that's another weird thing about disaster response is that whole system in the United States of a fire station or an ambulance or police station, being ready to instantly respond. None of that exists there. And so there was definite frustration, anger, a feeling of like, let's just go out on the streets and start handing out Band-Aids, because we had to put all of those things in place once we got to Nepal. And I kind of fault the leadership of the group I was with for not doing the advanced team thing, but it was a decision made above me. And then a couple of us would go out during the day and try to establish a relationship with a hospital, with a clinic, with this, with that, try to get involved in those cluster meetings so that we would have a framework and a way to act. But I will just say to you, it's not a rose garden. There will be times of frustration and feeling like you're not doing anything, and you've flown, 5,000 miles and probably spent money on your own ticket. And now you're just sitting around waiting to help and waiting to happen. So there's a lot of pros and cons to this as we go through. I did say that my first experience was volunteering in Haiti. I had reached out to a number of groups, larger, well-known groups like Doctors Without Borders and International Medical Corps, and I didn't have any experience, and they didn't want me until I had experience, but I couldn't get experience until I had experience. But I eventually found a smaller Christian group that already had basically a birthing center in Haiti for pregnant women, and they had turned it into a field hospital. And they kind of looked at me funny out like, oh, because you are tremendously vulnerable when you're in another country during a disaster. It's very difficult to get you out. It's difficult to get you in. If you turn out to be an unreliable partner, when you're there, you're going to jeopardize the entire team. But the opposite is true. That team is putting your safety at risk as well. If they have unsafe behavior in a disaster zone, you're depending on them to make good decisions. I had a good friend of mine who's a nurse who deployed to Africa during the Ebola outbreak. And he went with a very well-respected group who had never deployed to Africa before. And they didn't do a good job of team cohesion and teamwork and leadership. And in some ways, similar to my experience in Nepal, for the first week or two, they sat around because they didn't have a clear mission. And a couple of people on the team got really frustrated and started going out to the market and going out to the restaurants and eating. They were just bored sitting in their guest house during an Ebola outbreak. And that put the rest of the team very much at risk. And those people just didn't want to obey the team leader. And the team leader didn't want to be mean and say, I'm really serious, guys. You can't go out and go wander around town because you're bored. And if one of those Americans or Canadians had gotten Ebola, all the resources would have gone to that person. That would have, every resource, international plane flight, helicopters, ambulances, that would have really diminished it would have been the opposite of the effect. They were going there to help people with Ebola, but if one of their, Western aid workers got Ebola, it would have been the opposite. So I throw that out there because Diego had mentioned this, I think he had mentioned this idea of conflict on the team. And I was amazed during Haiti, I get on a plane with all these do-gooders like myself, we're here to help, we're heroes. And within like 2 or 3 days, I hated them all. This person talked too much. This person snored at night. This person had an annoying laugh. And there is a whole, and I should remember, maybe Diego remembers, it's called forming, storming, norming. I mean, it's a psychological phenomenon in groups. And I put it, not another plug for my book. I looked it up and got the name for it. But on like the second or third day, you're going to hate everyone in your group. You're going to find them so annoying. And I did want to ask our EMT or the other gentleman from the fire station, I mean, have those group dynamics ever happened to you?
Yeah, I know for me, they definitely have, even when we've undergone some big like training procedures, RTF or, active shooter training, but by the end of the 2 or 3 day training, we're all like, I don't ever want to be in this situation with you ever. Because it definitely does happen when you're trying to work in a group and work as a team in that way.
For sure. And then again, it came, maybe I was naive, and maybe some of these other people experienced this in other ways. Maybe people experience it in high school sports or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or church groups. But I was like, why do I hate these people? And it's just part of that psychological evolution of a small group. And by day 12 or 13, we had come back together. We were fine. Some of those rough edges had been worn off, and it was all good. So here's that picture of this young kid. His name was Simon. He was trapped under the rubble for a couple of days, and I think a day and a half, and then pulled out and with a skull fracture. Everyone at the clinic kind of adopted him because his parents had been killed. And so, but I just throw that out there to my previous picture. I posted this on social media. I was proud of what I did. I'm not ashamed of that, but there are these ethical questions as we go through. I'm going to give myself about 2 or 3 more minutes, which I ended up talking more than I meant to, but this is fun. I enjoy interacting with you all. A few more things about the Philippines. I went over there with another small medical group. We did connect with the cluster system. We faced a lot of issues. This is the debris problem after the storm, the typhoon had a big tsunami that pushed, just destroyed the first floor of all these buildings. That's rotting food, that's dead animals, that's rice that was stored on that first floor. Everyone just kind of pushed out to the street. Every time you would walk by, just clouds of black flies would fly up. And so you kind of, that's just something that you're going to have to get used to if you choose to have one of these experiences. From a bigger perspective, debris management, I don't know if anybody chose that role in your disaster scenario, but it's huge. You've got to just get rid of hundreds of dump trucks full of this stuff after a big disaster. Technology will fail. I think, there's the very few cell phones, or, the internet's down. So people kind of revert back to these whiteboards with what medicines are available at that hospital. This is from the Philippines. So that people would wait in line for 5 or 6 hours, and then they'd get up to the front door of the emergency room, and it would turn out, oh, we don't have this thing that you need. So we were part of that. We set up a clinic next to the emergency room. We treated lower acuity people, higher acuity people. We referred over to the emergency room, which had more capabilities. But this is just that flexible mindset after a disaster. Any questions? Quick cultural story in the Philippines. One of our local hosts found us an apartment to stay in that the family had left. Directly above us were a group of Chinese businessmen, young Chinese businessmen in their 20s, who ran a cell phone store. And we were very grateful for them. They let us use their Wi-Fi, come up to their apartment and use their Wi-Fi, and we could get on Facebook or whatever and tell our families we were doing okay. And one night the gentleman asked me if I wanted, with using hand signals, I don't speak Chinese and they didn't speak much English, if I wanted a drink of their herbal liquor. And I felt it was only appropriate and polite to take a drink of whatever concoction of roots and berries and whatever. And so they poured me a glass and I tasted it, and it was awful. And then I took a closer look at the bottle, and it was dead seahorses soaked in, I think, whiskey. And so I had to tell my family, to their great amusement, that I had had seahorse juice when I was in the Philippines. And I will say that's just it's an experience. Like it kind of broke down some of my rough edges, and it is what it is. After I had figured out that I was drinking seahorse juice, I said, guys, this is way too good for me. I don't deserve this. You need to finish this. So I throw that out there, that you will run into cultural things that will in some ways broaden your experiences. This is Nepal after the big earthquake there. A lot of the homes there are built out of bricks. That shaking just knocked them right over. And it was a lesser developed country beforehand, and to lose thousands and thousands of homes was just devastating. Also, I think the earthquake happened in April, which is about the time they were set to harvest all their crops, April and May. And so they had a kind of a choice. Do I try to rebuild my house? Do I try to harvest these crops, or I'm going to lose my income for the rest of the year? This is the slide about donation management. I think after a big natural disaster or any kind of disaster, I think this is so relevant with Ukraine being in the news. People want to help. But they also want to, do good for themselves. So let's mail or ship all of our old clothes to a disaster. And so this was in Nepal, where groups had sent bags and bags and bags of clothing after the earthquake. And when people go through these bags, they find bathing suits and prom dresses and just, stuff that's not needed in a disaster zone. It would have probably been better for these people to mail $100 cash instead of, or transfer $100 in money instead of sending 3 bags full of inappropriate clothing, which is just going to get thrown away when it gets to the disaster zone. So donations management is a big part of any disaster, making sure that the right things are donated, or if it's money, that it's given out fairly. So that's just another big part. This little girl kind of made me, she's got a lot of attitude. I like that. She's got a little sassy look in her eyes. But I thought it was interesting. All of the adults were making tent housing after their houses had fallen down. And this was a way, I think, of the kids dealing with the disaster mentally, was they made their own tent fort to reflect what their parents are doing, to make sense of the disaster. So I think that as you deal with the kids in a disaster, it's going to really affected me. And I didn't have kids at the time, Now that I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, I think this would affect me even more deeply. But just there's a practical aspect of children's mental health. There's the cycle of how it's affecting you, to watch these kids who are dealing with the after effects of the disaster. Last 1 or 2 slides, I swear, and then I'll open it up and give it back. I worked in the super shelter at Houston during the Hurricane Harvey there. And I'll just say that, it's the most vulnerable wherever that are affected. If someone had a relative to stay with, they went and stayed with them. If they had a hotel room that they could afford, 2 counties away, they went and stayed with them. These were people who were already living week to week in a motel. They were homeless, and they bore the brunt of this disaster. Lastly, I got a chance, due to my international experiences, to work for the U.S. Agency for International Development on a short-term contract in Ethiopia. I went over there 4 times, helping them create some exercises for their version of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I got to take a picture in front of a fire truck. What more could you ask for? But because I had built up these previous experiences, it allowed me to have this cool experience right before the pandemic struck, and I've not been able to travel since then. That's the book I wrote. Again, I get like $1, $2 from it. I'm not getting rich off of it, but I think it had a system of trying to build up your experiences, build up like some mental toughness that I didn't have at the beginning. And this whole idea of going from technology and computers, these were the things, this was epidemiology tracking in the Philippines after the typhoon. What was the most common cause that they came into the hospital that day, so they could track if an infectious disease was kind of moving its way through. More paper tracking. That woman is wearing a khaki vest. I think I mentioned that's critical if you're going to respond overseas. I should have let the picture not be so cropped. And I did talk about that psychological toll. Last thing I'll say is, when I was in Nepal, there was a major aftershock, and within an hour or 2, I was able to tell my wife, I'm doing fine. But she didn't have access to any of my social media accounts. So she knew I was fine. My immediate family knew I was fine. But a lot of my friends who I told I was going to Nepal, didn't hear from me from a week or 2. And they all wondered, what happened after that aftershock? Were you okay? And so there's a psychological toll on you. There's a psychological toll on your family, your friends, your work.